A great day here on the second day at Ake. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my colleague Mazi Nwonwu. He was supposed to be here today. He's a BBC journalist, and unfortunately, some news has taken over, so I'll be replacing him for this session. Why does African speculative fiction matter? I think we've spoken a lot about it today, but we'd like to delve deeper into it with our panel. Speculative fiction, in its broadest possible definition of speculative science fiction fantasy, includes horror, slipstream, interstitial stories based on traditional beliefs, alternate histories. And this has long been a place where societies imagine their future. They review their histories and they confront their present. African speculative fiction does this with a unique power, grounding bold imagination in African realities, worldviews, and traditions. So we ask today, why does this matter? Why are African voices in speculative fiction essential to literature, to culture, and to the global imagination? And how can they continue to shape futures, both on the continent and beyond? So I'm going to hand over to my wonderful, illustrious panel here to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice meeting you all. This is my fourth time being at Ake. My first time was in 2022, and I've been attending every year since, because it's a nice time for me to meet people who are interested in the things that I'm interested in, and it's just a very, very immersive festival, and I always want to come back. So I'm Chisom Umeh. I'm a speculative fiction writer. I write short fiction, I write fantasy, I write science fiction, all kinds of speculative fiction. And thankfully, I recently won the NOMO Award for short story, and it was announced here like yesterday. So that's about that.
Hi everyone, my name is Marvellous Anson, and I'm the author of Firstborn of the Sun, which is an epic fantasy inspired by Yoruba culture.
Hi everyone, my name is Adedapo Adeniyi. I'm a writer, filmmaker, photographer, and I'm a writer of speculative fiction. I write African futurism, surrealism, abstractism, absurdism, and horror. Yeah, so, and my debut novella came out a while ago and is available here, and it's called Wanderer. Thank you.
Thank you all. We'd like to just kind of get comfortable with the theme of African speculative fiction and cultural identity. How does this form of fiction draw from African histories, from our myths, and how does it guide building our futures? And here I'd like if you can all touch on aspects such as fidelity. How do we balance accuracy with storytelling? What is the responsibility of you for you as authors in this field?
Okay, I think African speculative fiction draws from our history as Africans by focusing on things like our myths, culture, philosophy, storytelling methods, oral storytelling, and all of those things, because speculative fiction sometimes is an amalgamation of all of these things. You find mythology, you find politics, you find philosophy in a speculative work, And when a work of speculative fiction zeroes in on a culture like that to pick all those things, it helps it transcend storytelling, traditional storytelling methods, to help explain that culture very, very well, So when you find a piece of speculative work going in depth to do things like that, you see that you're not just buttressing or portraying that culture from one dimension. You're bringing in different angles and different ways of seeing that thing. Do you understand? So it's more like a showcase. So, for instance, for instance, Marvellous's work that talks about Yoruba mythology, just by writing that book and someone reading it, they can find out a lot about how past Yoruba thinkers, and Yoruba cultures operated, and somebody who is uninformed or not within that space can read that and take away a lot from it, even though there's a whole lot of fiction and world building going on there. There's a whole lot of new stuff. Still, it's an immersive experience. So a work like that leaves you inspired to want to go and know more. I know I've read books, fantasy books, that when I found out what inspired that story, I wanted to go back and find out more about that history, because you find a rich canvas of storytelling that always makes you want to go back. So I've read many books that when I found out the history, I remember when reading Dune, I wanted to go back and find out how did this person come up with these sprawling worlds, these desert worlds, what was the science behind it? What was the culture? What culture did they take? Even though Dune is set in the far future, for those of you who have read Dune, like it's set in the far future, still the author took from real cultures, and used it in a way that were very relatable. And if you read them, they're always very, very interesting and they hold your attention. So speculative fiction has this ability to draw on all of these things and present them in such an interesting and entertaining way that you can get educated just by reading it, So that's how I feel like speculative fiction draws from our cultures. And the responsibility of us as authors, knowing this, is that when we are telling a story, knowing full well that we are sort of exporting our culture to people outside or outsiders, I think we have to do our research. The things you don't know about, you have to find out about them, go to wherever you want to go to the actual locations, ask people, who have those knowledge, just so that when people read those things, they are not reading the wrong versions of them, in as much as we are doing world building in our speculative stories, in as much as we are myth making, in as much as we are bringing new things, the few that we tell, we still have to make them as original as possible. So yeah.
Thank you, Chisom. I think Marvellous, this morning, you spoke a little bit about this, about your quest for fidelity through speaking with your family, through translation, transcription with your cousin, I think you mentioned. And again, can you touch on that, the balance of trying to transmit as accurately as possible without stifling your own narrative and imagination?
I think, so what I'm trying to do from the perspective of, as I said in the morning, I see this as a folk tale. And folk tales are what we use to carry on myths so we don't forget it. And when I think about the fact that Yoruba tradition is based very heavily on oral storytelling, so the things we know about our myths today, it's because people have remembered quite largely, and they have taken on the responsibility of holding these stories in their minds, making sure that someone remembers it, and the person who then takes that on holds that as well. And in that, I consider how much has been lost. And I'm very grateful for the things that are kept. So for the things that remain, I feel like there is a huge responsibility in keeping it as true as possible. Of course, each person's memory will differ. People, each family will add their own version of it. And I talked about how Yoruba people who were taken into the diaspora added their own gods to the pantheon, and that continues to expand. So there are different versions of it, but for the versions of it that do exist, I think it's really important that it can be a source of research text, if maybe not the only research, but a touch point that readers or people who are looking to know more about the culture can read it and think, oh, I understand it a little bit. I often had, my editor's a white woman, and I had many conversations with her when she's like, I don't know why this woman's upset because this woman did not even say anything. I'm like, yeah, trust me. The aunties will be upset. We have to leave it in. And then I'm having to explain, the ways that we live as people, the things that we take as important, the reason why you have to greet someone 3 times in the same conversation, why you don't accept things with your left hand. Little things like that, I think just help to hone in the authenticity of it. So I really want a Yoruba person to read this and think, yeah, that's absolutely me. And someone who is not to read it and think, that is quite interesting, but also interesting enough to be remembered. So I have a huge thing about just remembering, and that's again because of all the things that I feel like we've lost over the years. But just in terms of speculative fiction, I think growing up, I never really thought that as a culture we had a difference between fiction, speculative fiction and fiction. In that when we're growing up, we hear stories about the talking animals and the gods with powers, and I never once questioned it. I just believe that there is someone that can probably speak to Shango and summon some fire. There is somewhere a torch is. Maybe in the past they used to talk. As kids, we never really questioned it. So I do wonder how much of the idea of speculative and fantasy and making it into a genre is perhaps a bit of a Western thing, in that for us, stories are stories. And we believe them wholeheartedly. Like growing up, I wasn't watching Super Story thinking I'm watching fantasy. I thought I was watching something that is absolutely happening somewhere.
That's a very interesting take, and I think we can all take a little bit from that. I wanted to ask you, is there a particular additional responsibility for us as Africans for the need for that fidelity? Because our stories are reaching a global market for the first time with such a big drive.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Because, unfortunately, Mazi isn't here, but he had written this article that shared, I'd say, like a couple of us shared displeasures about something. There was this South African film that had come out a couple years ago called District 9. And it was a science fiction film. And, it had a lot of acclaim. It was globally accepted as like a great science fiction film. But it portrayed Nigerians as savages. Portrayed, there was a community of Nigerians in the film that were portrayed as savages. It was an alien film. And so our own deal was that we wanted to capture the aliens and eat them for their powers. And, I'm thinking to myself watching this film that people are going to watch this film and think, this is how we are. And, then I read Ned Okorafor's article, I read Mazi's article on it, and it's like, okay, I'm not crazy, there's a couple other people who agree and think that this is absurd. And so I think the most important thing, of course, is truth. And also that I say that we aren't lying to ourselves. Because we can lie very well. And people won't know. But we will. And if it's not unsettling to even a little bit, then there's so much of our morality that we have to rethink. There's so much of our humanity that we have to rethink. Because it's like, okay, this is just basic societal cues, this is just culture and love, it's like I'm writing a story and I know that there's going to be so many people that are going to read this, and obviously the work of not even just spec fic writers, but the work of writers generally is to, I say, inspire, or to just change something. It's just someone's going into my story or my book or a film or even music, and we're thinking to ourselves that hopefully this person comes out of it changed. And then it's like biases or dishonesties or just like, confusion, a misinterpretation of someone or something presented in that just like shifts a person's whole thought process. And thinking also about like how fidelity like stands against time, people still reference 1984 till today because of the world we're living in. People still reference 2001 when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Even to come back like home, anybody listens to Fela's music today and they're like, shit, same world. And everyone listens to, the kind of music he put out, and, you look at the political sphere in Nigeria and you're just like, okay. So, I mean, I feel like for us speculative writers especially, we are a reflection of society, the good, the bad, the twisted, and I think it's our responsibility, like that nobody's forcing us anyway, but I think it's like, it should be something that we think of that truth is number one.
Thank you so much for that and for reminding us the role of really literature in all its form and arts in all its form is that lens back to ourselves, back to our humanity, and to reclaiming truth, which is a major and fantastic theme of Ake's festival. I think speculative fiction, why I promote speculative fiction is because it gives us a new lens, a wide lens that we can approach that truth in. Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit more now about this explosion in African SF, not only here in the continent with the growth, we know it because our membership is growing exponentially, but also all around the world. We're being invited to awards at a global stage. Major amounts of translations are being requested. We're appearing in more and more festivals. So I want to just kind of gauge from you as writers in this field and creators in this field, the evolution of the space. How is that affecting you? What's happening with social media? How are you also playing in that space? Because I think this is becoming a major part of the marketing identity of authors. And what other work do we need to do to support you? And in that way, what's the role of intentionality as we expand into this global arena?
Okay, I think that social media is a big driver in all of these things happening, and the way social media has expanded, anybody can instantly have an audience, There are platforms that you can join just like today, like this afternoon, and you can post something, and before evening it has like 1,000 views, even without having any followers or anything, So that definitely drives the movement, the expansion, So, and that is like a two-edged sword, because as it gives you exposure, instant exposure, it also gives you responsibility, to be faithful to that thing that you're suddenly showing to the whole world, There's this thing that I feel happens sometimes because the Western media or group or whatever feels like there's a whole lot of explosion going on in this region, and they want to cash in on that, And I don't know, maybe they think they've exhausted their own stories, like they've told every form of everything that they can tell, and so they somehow look for where it's hot, where the stove is still hot, and they come there, and then but they want to do something with your story, which is they like the story, but they don't like it in the way you're telling it. They want to tell it in their own words or ideas, something like that. And I've been in such a situation where somebody, like, I wrote a story for somebody, they accepted the story. And then, but in the end, what was eventually published was so different from what I wrote that I till now I've never gone back to look at the story again. Because I kept asking myself, so why then did you accept this thing? Why did you accept it if you wanted something so different from what I presented initially? And each time I go back, I've not even gone back to look at the story again, But I feel I'm going to be traumatized when I go back there because I just kept conceding and conceding and conceding. And maybe I might not do that again in the future, But as at that time, I just wanted the story to be out. So I kept shifting grounds and shifting. And at some point, I was like, okay, whatever you guys want, just tell me, let me just do. And you publish the thing, So I feel like in as much as we have this growing, this groundswell, we also have that much responsibility to tell the authentic stories that we know, you understand? So that whoever is reading it out there would not misinterpret us, just like that Paul was saying with a science fiction film that portrayed us a certain type of way, So there's a whole lot of marketing buzzwords going on, and this thing where I don't know. I'm sorry if some people have done it. Like you put up a picture and of your book or whatever, you put arrows, this trope, that trope, this trope, that trope, and it feels like there's people want a particular type of story, and you have to like contort to fit into that. So I'm just saying that we don't need to do all of that. You can tell a story as authentic as you can, and you actually have that duty to make it as authentic as possible, So now the doors are opening. There are new magazines, literary magazines coming up every day due to the power of social media. You can literally start a magazine from a literary magazine from your room, and publish whatever kind of thing you want. And it's a good thing. I encourage that. I just feel like people have to be very truthful when they are telling their stories and informative as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Chisom. Marvellous, would you like to kind of follow up on that with your own experiences with this huge explosion and focus on African speculative fiction writers?
Yeah, I think the first thing I realized is the difference in how we tell stories. So there's a bit more structure in the international market and in the publishing world. So you have the 3-act structure, the 4-act structure, and there's an expectation to make things fit there. So a lot of my initial research when deciding that I was going to tell a fantasy story that was going to be about Yoruba people, but it is for an international market, I did have to study that. So in the end, if you break down this book, it will fit loosely into a 3-act structure, very loosely, but it will have a beginning, a middle, and an end, basically. But it's something I had to take on board as a balance between, because I said this in the morning as well, I'm hoping that when people read this book, they're very much I'm trying to create the experience of you're listening to someone tell you the story. And in a spoken story like that, the person isn't really pausing to say, this is the end of Act 1, take a break, and then you go to the next part. It's just a story that flows, and it's a story that holds your attention, usually when you're tired, or, if you imagine something like Tales by Moonlight, you're really tired, it's the end of the day, it's cold, yet you have your full attention on every word that this person's saying. And so I had to find this balance between telling the story in a way that our griots will and our storytellers will, versus written text. So there is a balance between it as well, because with my, I completely understand what you're saying in terms of edits and changing things. So whenever my editor would tell me to change something, if I didn't like it, I had to first ask myself what my trouble with it was. Is it something that was changing culturally, the context of what I was trying to do? Or was it like just, pacing or general kind of grammatical things. So deciding where that feedback fell into really helped in not compromising too much on the story, yet
Being open at the same
being
time.
open in a way that you can still publish a book and have the semblance of structure.
And how have you found the social media aspect of promotion for you particularly?
It's a struggle. It is a bit of a struggle. I do have help in my social media, so I have friends that help. But a writer's job is not to be on social media. It is to write the book in the middle of the night, somewhere alone with your own thoughts and your laptop or your paper. And how writers interact with the world is through this text, and ideally this text alone. So when you then ask to reduce it to not just a blurb, but to tropes and prompt words, which have their place, to be fair, it becomes really difficult because you're asking me to do a new job, but people go to school to be marketers, and I haven't done that. So you're asking me to be as good as someone who is skilled in this thing. And then people judge you as a writer based on your ability to sell the book as well, which is, again, two different jobs. I can be a really good writer, but a really poor seller, marketer, any of these things. But social media almost makes your first interaction is, oh, did I find this quote intriguing enough? Which is very different. This is 600 pages. I can't explain it in 2 words, in 2 sentences.
Definitely not. What about you and your experiences across, the evolution of social media, of African science fiction? A lot of eyes are on it. We have a huge amount of communities on social media. There's a demand now by publishers that you participate in the marketing of your book more actively than ever before. And it's very, very difficult for many authors. Like Marvellous said, my job is done. I've produced the book. What next,
Yeah, okay. So, okay. I think before going to the conversation around social media, or like still circling around it, social media has really helped, especially with speculative fiction, because I think for a lot of us, if not for the accessibility that the internet gave us in regards to like finding all these stories and books, we would be in like this bubble where I think it has changed now, where a lot of us are thinking about evolution instead of invention, where as young writers, it's very easy to say that you're doing something no one has ever done, especially here. And then you start reading like older sci-fi or fantasy or spec fic writers from here, and you're like, oh, okay, it's been evolving. It's just the times that are changing, and we're all kind of just like connected to the same source at the end of the day, where it's like that's where it's all coming from. Because at first it was very easy for us to gravitate towards like fantasy, just because of our kinship towards it. And then science fiction came in, and now we're seeing like so many genres. We had you talk about Akweke Mazi and Elogosa Sunday. I was talking about like the liminality of like queerness in a speculative sense. We're talking about African cosmology in terms of like your work and DS Followers' work. We're talking about weird fiction or absurdists. Definitely way more like we're getting into very experimental waters that has only been and will only continue to be propagated by the accessibility that these writers have had to the past, that we all share as spec fic writers as a gateway to the future of what spec fic is going to be. And I think for me, after I finished my book and it slept in my laptop for the longest time, and it's like, okay, it's out now. What are we talking about? I don't know how marketing works. I'm a writer. That's where it starts and ends for me. And for them to now say like, see, if you want people to read your book, you have to look at them in the eye like this and convince them about why it's relevant or why they should read it. And it's like, and you're thinking to yourself like, can't they just trust me? Like, can't they just like look at the cover and say, hey, this is nice, Because my book doesn't have the title on it or a blurb behind it, where it's just like, I believe that you see it and God from heaven is going to look back at you from it and say, buy me. And they were like, yeah, this makes no sense. But I think there's definitely way more unorthodox ways to market things now. It's not such a linear market anymore. I think, especially, I'm saying like, if we respect fake writers, then there should be something called speculative marketing as well. Like, so yeah, so like we don't really need to, like, sure, it works, it has worked, but I believe that for the kind of writing that we put out and the kind of community we have, there should be there are definitely way more interesting, immersive ways to put out our work at this point.
Can you share some ideas you have?
I don't have any.
I feel like having a community, community is very important, and when you have that community, it helps. People spread your word by your book by word of mouth. And I would like to say that you shouldn't listen too much to that one because he's actually doing a great job with marketing of his book, and he has a nice social media following, and I never met him before I found out about his book. So at least he's doing something right, So maybe it's the speculative marketing thing that he's doing, and so if you have that community, you have somewhere you fall back to, we all like to be the isolated writer who just writes things and the marketing team picks it up and just starts moving the machine, but we don't all have that privilege, So like we now as speculative community, we have a group chat where we're always promoting each other's stuff. This person writes a story and somebody else picks it up and posts on the group like, this story is out, or like, have you checked it out? And people will be like, I've read it, and someone starts a podcast and they'll be like, my next live stuff is by this day, can you guys tune in? And we show up, and that way we are always showing up for each other, we're always promoting stuff, and it's good. Like, that is why it makes sense to join something like the ASFS, and I found a community in ASFS since I was part of it, because I always used to do the isolated writer stuff, but we are in a globalized world now, and you can't do everything yourself. So having that sense of community where when you're done writing, you can fall back to it, and at least you find one or two persons that would critique your work and give you feedback, and it helps. Like, you can start from there, So I feel like that's one of the strategies we can use to put our things out in the world, even without having a big marketing budget and something like that. So,
we just, as we are coming kind of halfway through our chat, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about, more broadly, about some of the barriers we all face as a community of writers and readers, and this has to do with the barriers of publishing. I know in Nigeria there's a lot of activity happening, but it still has not the reach that we needed to get there. And there seems to be some limitations and some assumptions that actually you have to be published in the West first. And so some of these barriers include payment platforms. Obviously, as I mentioned, the assumption that visibility is only linked to visibility in Western markets, and how can we change some of these assumptions? I also would like you to share with us how, I know within our membership, people are writers, they're writing novels, but they're also holding 2 or 3 other jobs. So Can you share with this wonderful audience what you see these challenges are and how are you overcoming them?
The truth is, writing in general doesn't pay much. That's just the truth, like, period. Then you make it worse when you're writing speculative fiction that people consider genre, like they don't consider it. Unfortunately, many people don't consider speculative fiction mainstream, and you see it reflect in award ceremonies, what people the films people choose to promote more, they see like speculative fiction is this unserious thing, So when your writing is not mainstream, you're already second class, So now you have to put in extra effort to now get far, because people don't rate you in the beginning. So now there's this payment stuff, and unfortunately, when you start off as a writer, especially in speculative fiction, you just have to look for many platforms that are willing to take your work for free, just so that you get your name out there. That was how I started. So there are platforms like that. They too are looking for new writers so that they can just promote themselves. So you have to find stuff like people like that to help you get your work out. And it's I don't think it's the ideal way to exist as a writer, because you're going to get fatigued very quickly. When you spend months writing and editing your story, rewriting, searching for feedback, getting beta readers to read, and eventually, when somebody takes it, like, you don't even get a dime from that. That can be disappointing and discouraging. So there needs to be platforms that are willing to pay writers and pay speculative fiction writers, decent amounts, so that it serves as an encouragement to them. Also, I feel like there needs to be more education to people about what speculative fiction is and what it is not, and how interesting it is. Like, it needs to be more exciting for people to want to come in and write more stuff like that. So that's why I think like a panel like this is super important for the education of people. So when I see work like Kerry Wem's book doing numbers and he's doing thoughts, I'm like, wow, so we can be this receptive to fantasy book like in Nigeria here. Most times what we want to read here is literary fiction, So, but the narrative is sort of changing now, and it's a good thing. So yeah. So these are the things I feel like are changing, and more work still needs to be done. Actually, we still need to talk to people about it. We still need to educate people, tell people that there are so many interesting writers, people like Suyi Davis, Tade Thompson, that are doing good work out there. And if you read their work, you'll be challenged, and you want to write stuff like that as well. So yeah, that's.
Thank you, Chisom. Marvellous?
I think writers do need to be paid, but it's more to the industry than to writers, because we can say it to ourselves and say, we know we deserve to be paid, but publishers, literary magazines, places that accept stories, there's a huge, a lot of people are starting to realize that the concept of like an unpaid internship is like really bad, and people are just like, you should not do that, you're taking advantage of people. I'm hoping for that kind of feeling towards unpaid writing, because like you said, it takes months of your life, even if it's a short story, it could very well take years. And it's something that you're honing, it's a craft, it's a skill, it's something that not everyone can do. And for that reason alone, if it's something that's going to be accepted for publication, I believe that we absolutely should be paid. But it's not, this message is not for writers, because we know this already. It's very much for the people who are in the position to do said paying, and seeing it as more than just words on a page. They'll sometimes say, oh, it's just a page in our magazine, or it's just half a page, or it's just a poem. If it's going to be there and my name's going to be with it, then you should pay me. Yeah, that's the message.
Adedapo, what do you have to add to this discussion about challenges and opportunities?
Well, so I'm anti-capitalist, but I'm unfortunately also a firstborn Nigerian. So I have to like shift aside my own needs to think about like the bigger picture. And obviously, as a writer and as someone who woke up and decided that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and then you think about, oh, are my parents going to take me seriously if this is it's supposedly my day job and no money is coming from it, and how do I survive? And these are all the questions that a person starts to ask themselves. And so I think like it's not, it's just like an issue, it's just something that comes to mind. It's like, I wish I was paid more. Like you just think to yourself like, man, I wish like somebody read this story and thought like, hey, let me send you some money because it's so good. But I think outside of just like finances, there's like a lot more ways that we can be helped or I guess assisted or promoted. Like some people don't really want, some people, there's like, cash prizes are good, but imagine if you win an award and they're like, oh, one of the rewards is that you get like a publishing deal or something. And then from there, like, who knows, maybe your life will change, or, there's like certain organizations in place. There's grants. I think grants are great because writing is expensive. And, I think it just like, outside of giving credibility to, I guess, the organizations, it gives credibility to the art itself. Like, I think I go into Speculative for the love of the game, but assuredly, like, there's way more people who, and this is just like outside of money being like bait to get more writers or whatever, but there's certain people who, there's so many stories. You talk to older people and they're like, I used to write in school too, but, like, well, I had to get a job or this, that, blah, blah. And it's like, well, if someone actually read your work and thought, hey, this was good, and, like, things happened from there and you were comfortable, like, I think everyone's dream is to be comfortable enough to just keep writing. Not that, you're just writing to make ends meet. Once that end has been met for a little period of time, you have to slave again to, just have this little time window where you can enjoy for, whatever reason. And so it's like if there are organizations in like that are put in place, I'd say to ensure that, even residencies, like there's many ways that writers can be made comfortable enough that they actually feel happy to write. It's not that, oh, there's a writing competition. Let me quickly scroll and see how much the prize money is so that I'll know if I want to apply or not.
Yeah, removing the hustle from it, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think there's a space for that. I think us being here, the kind of festivals that the Book Buzz Foundation does, and the more festivals that are happening, that hopefully we in the continent are moving towards that kind of infrastructure and philosophy. Thank you all so much for talking to us and for sharing your own stories. I think it's time for the Q&A. Some things, oh wow, there's a lot of questions. Shall we start? Let's start with this side of the room for now, yeah.
Hi. Oh, thank you, everybody. Thank you. My question is for, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. My question is for Marvellous. I wanted to know, I liked what you said about wanting your book to read like someone was telling the story. So how did you, is there an audiobook? And if so, like, how did you bring that into the audiobook production process? What did you do to make sure that the narration of it lended itself to your goal, which is that it should reflect the oral storytelling tradition that we see here?
Great question, because I love talking about audio. So we have two narrators, but before that, in the book, there's the main point of view characters, so the story that you're reading, and there's a narrator that appears in the epigraphs, so in little paragraphs at the start of each chapter. And if you put that all together, she's telling you a story. And so at the start of it, she says some things, and she says to the reader, "So it is you, the God sent to take my share," which translates to secrets. And so she's actively telling you that you're here to listen to her. And at the end of it, she says, I'm taking a break, come back for book 2. She didn't say book 2, but basically she's taking a break, and she's just imagining as someone getting up and going to coming back. And so I really wanted that to be 2 different voices, because the narrator is one that is the reader is connecting to, and the story is what you're hearing. So we have 2 narrators in it. We have, if anyone watches Bridgerton, we have the lady that plays Lady Danbury be the narrator, and she's really good. Adjoa Ando, yes. She's incredible. She did it in 1 take, so and so she brings this really experienced voice. It's rich, it's deep, it sounds exactly like this old wise person telling you the secret that you must not forget. And for the rest of the book, we have, if anyone watches, Bob Hart's Abishola. Abishola is played by Folake, and she reads the whole of the book. And I had the privilege of listening to her while she was reading it, which was many, many hours. But so I could quite literally be like, okay, stop, no, Laura sounds like this, or Tofa sounds like this, or I wanted him to be a bit angrier. So a bit of directing in that. And she was so gracious to allow me to interrupt her many times. So I'm hoping that by the time you read it, you can tell that it comes across how I intended it to be, mostly because I got to be in the room quite literally to say, stop, do it again.
Next question, over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Demi, big fan of Specfic, and I'm so grateful that you guys are here today. So I want to ask a very practical question. It has to do with world building, and I would like 3 of you to answer. So I worked on a short story for myself and created a country that did not exist in Africa and did all of that. And it was out of this world. And I shared it with someone, and someone gave me feedback because I put something as simple as a donut in it. And someone gave me feedback and was like, if you're creating this kind of massive world, I don't think a donut should exist. And I took that and I was like, oh, it's food now. And so I want to ask you guys, what are the, should I say, top 3 things to think of when you're doing world building, or what would you like to say about that? Thank you.
Just because I do like this question. Consistency. So I created, the first one is a second world, and there are things I would not accept a donut. I would have given the same feedback. There are things you can't have, especially if the origin of the word or the technology is publicly known to everyone. So it's something called the Tiffany effect. So Tiffany is a name that we all know, and it's very popular now. But if you're writing a Regency or a medieval story and you put the name Tiffany, it takes the reader out of it because it sounds like the girl down the road. However, Tiffany is a name that's existed. It's a very old name. It's almost as old as the name Mary. But just because we know it in this time as something that you probably know a Tiffany, it doesn't feel like an old name. And so it takes you out of it. And so the effect means anything that would take your reader out of it. If I know I'm in a second world and you haven't told me that these people have used flour in this way and they have confectionaries and they do this, and then you take me through the way to getting a donut, it would take me out of it immediately. So an example of this in my book is they don't have clocks or time. They can tell time in different ways and they use magic, but they don't have clocks because I didn't want to go into the history of clocks. And so these beads I'm wearing, I use them, everyone in the book has them, and they use their agbara to ignite it, the beads, and each bead, so the gold bead would be the sun or the moon, and each bead afterwards counts the first bead, second bead. And so in the book, you say meet me at 4th bead. They all know what they're talking about because I explained this in the book, but I didn't want to bring a clock because I didn't want to describe the technology of a clock, and they have magic. And so they use magic for things like boiling pots, everyday life, because everyone has it. And so you have to think about the characters that you've created. It needs to fit for the world.
No, would any of you would like to continue on that?
I think I like the donuts. I like the donuts. And if a person has to be taken, if a person is jolted out of your story, then like let them jolt back in. You know? Like let them go back in. Like I like speaking for myself as a reader now, not even just like a writer. If I'm reading something and like I'm immediately attacked by something, I think I like that. I think it's interesting. Like it keeps me on my toes. You know, it's like I wonder what next. I wonder if it's going to be ice cream next or something. You know, so I think that's cool.
Chisom, do you want to say something?
I also think that whatever you're putting in your story has to be faithful to the time period of that story. You know, if you're telling a story set in the medieval era and you put a donut there, some editors would not be comfortable with that, and they're going to press you until you do something about it. You know, so even beyond editors, you have to think about it. You know, if it portrays, unless you're writing a world that has like a system where there's a amalgamation of different times, it can happen in your story. You know, there's a certain part where there's a modern period, there's a certain place, or there's a time traveling effect in your world. You understand? But you have to set your story, you have to write your story in a way that whatever, even to the food that you eat and to the texture of the material of their clothing, has to be right with the time period, or else it might feel jarring. But there are people who can do it, like Dapo can do it, and and if you read his stories, you read something like that, and it will not feel out of place. So if you can do that, fine.
Sorry, just one more thing. I have a lot to say on this. When I was editing this book, I talked about how Miss Lola and I worked on the first chapter. There was a word there where I said she felt something in her veins, and she's like, "How does she know her veins?" Like, she's like, "Is she a medical doctor?" You can say she felt a chill in her body. But when you start using technical terms like veins, she's like, then you have to explain to me that and convince me in this world that the average person will think of veins instead of blood. So like the concept is the same, the story is the same, but you're just picking particular words. It will throw me out.
We're kind of running out of time, but just squeeze one last question from Ray here. Yeah.
Hi, okay, I'll just be really quick here. So I'll just be really quick here. You know my name. So I write sci-fi, science fiction, and you already said something about like speculative fiction not being seen as serious, especially like, oh, this doesn't feel African. Like there's always that doesn't feel African. Now with fantasy, you gave the way of, oh, there's mythology and all of that. So with the case of sci-fi, I don't know if Dapo or Chisom writes sci-fi. How do you then? What's your justification? Not that you need a justification for things like flying robots and aliens in Aba.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. So, what's about fantasy? I think fantasy is us like reinventing the past, you know, and these medieval or archaic traditions or ecosystems. But as someone who writes science fiction and who writes like hardcore sci-fi with all the flying and all of it, I think it's up to us to write the future as well. Where it's like surely a lot of the inventors we've had, a lot of the inventions we've had, were based on ideas by science fiction writers. You know, Arthur C. Clarke, H.G. Wells, you know, Asimov were some of the writers that just wrote these things in their books that I'd assume some child read and thought to himself, like, we could make that real if we wanted to. And so I think about, especially as someone who grew up on Neddy, especially, and thinking to myself, you know, that there was a certain way she, especially as an African or Nigerian, there was a certain way she wrote science fiction that didn't feel alien, You know, like she wrote an alien invasion in Lagos, and it had real time implications that made sense if you were somebody who was in Lagos. You know, like there's a lot of what ifs that I feel like we're coming to terms with as sci-fi writers in Nigeria, where it's like I don't think flying robots or any of those things are too exaggerated or too far away. You know, they're very possible. We're writing futures. Fantasy, those are, I think, reimagining, you know, tradition or things that we've had. But science fiction is us saying, what if, and what's 50 years from now going to look like from our POVs. So, yeah.
I just want to say as well that I think we deserve to see ourselves in the future. Like, if the future will be flying robots, there's no reason why we should not be there. I remember when I was younger watching a movie about the end of the world, and the first place that was wiped off the map, and they showed it, was Africa, like the whole continent. I'm like, so no, not one person survived this end of the world scenario. So I really appreciate sci-fi writers for thinking there will be a future, whatever it looks like, we will be there. My next book's a post-apocalyptic work set in Lagos. And, you know, in my pitch for it, it very much says, because at the end of the world, we will still be there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that that's why speculative fiction is very, very important, because it can help reshape the stories that they tell about us as a people and how we are going to look like in the future. Because like she said, we are always that demographic that feel the after effects of whatever has happened in the West. So when we write our own speculative fiction, we retell those stories and center ourselves, and they maybe might be the fringes.
Thank you all so much.